Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling a big one, happiness, with some help from a pretty incredible source.
Definitely incredible. We're diving into The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama himself.
With insights from psychiatrist Howard C. Cutler too, right? So we're blending perspectives here.
Yeah, Dalai Lama's wisdom meets Western psychology. Should be interesting.
So right off the bat, the book dives into this idea that happiness is an inside job. Which, okay, makes sense, but part of me was hoping for some easier shortcuts, you know?
Winning the lottery.
Yeah,
Right.
something like that. But the Dalai Lama would probably say that even that wouldn't guarantee lasting happiness.
He actually tells a story about meeting this businessman. Super successful on paper, but deeply unhappy.
Really?
Yeah, and it was this realization that money and success don't automatically equal inner peace.
Okay, so it's more about shifting our mindset, not just changing our circumstances.
Exactly. Cultivating a certain way of being, a way of looking at the world that brings contentment.
Which, how do you actually do that?
Well, the book digs into how our thoughts and emotions really shape our experiences.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like you can be surrounded by, I don't know, the most amazing things, but if your mind is filled with negativity.
You're not really experiencing any of it, are you? It's like when you're stressed and the food is flavorless.
Exactly. Our thoughts can either amplify our suffering or help us be happier.
Oh.
And one of the keys to that, according to the Dalai Lama, is compassion.
Okay, but what about when you're feeling lonely? Isn't focusing on others the ass thing you want to do?
It seems counterintuitive, but the Dalai Lama argues that compassion is actually the antidote to loneliness.
Really?
He talks about two types of compassion. One that's kind of selfish, wanting something in return, and then genuine compassion.
What's the difference?
It's about recognizing that everyone wants happiness and want to avoid suffering.
So it's less about someone fixing my loneliness and more about,
We're all in this together.
yeah,
Even that person who seems grumpy, they have their own joys and sorrows.
it's about seeing that shared humanity.
And when we extend that understanding, it can make us feel more connected, even in a crowded room.
Powerful stuff. So we're talking about connecting with others. The Dalai Lama has some really interesting thoughts on relationships too, right? Relationships definitely a big part of the whole happiness equation or equation quest, I guess.
For sure, and the Art of Happiness gets into that, especially romantic relationships.
Which can be tricky.
The Dalai Lama, cautions against getting caught up in that fantasy of romantic love.
You mean like the movies, where it's all instant fireworks and grand gestures.
Exactly. He says those feelings, as intense as they are,
Intense is right.
they're often fleeting, built on an idea, not the actual person.
So more about accepting the whole package, flaws and all, rather than that fairy tale.
Exactly. Building on affection, real compassion, respect, that's key for him.
Which, that takes honesty, right? With yourself and your partner.
Absolutely. And, recognizing that relationships, they change.
Like everything else, impermanence, big concept for Buddhism. Central. Everything's in flux, our relationships, our work, even who we think we are.
And clinging to how things used to be, that's where we get stuck.
Right, exactly. So instead of trying to freeze frame our relationships,
We have to adapt.
yeah, find new ways to connect as things change. That spark might become something calmer, but no less deep.
It's like instead of don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened, it's not over. It's just different.
Love that. And impermanence, it's not just relationships, it's everything, especially the hard parts of life.
You mean like pain, suffering, all that? Can't exactly avoid it.
The Dalai Lama, he doesn't shy away from that. He says, accept it, it's natural.
Easier said than done, right? How are we supposed to find meaning in pain, especially when it feels so random?
And that's where his perspective is so interesting. He says, if we shift our mindset, suffering can actually be a way to grow.
Okay, hold on. How do we do that? Go from why me to like a learning experience.
He uses this example of like military training.
Oh, soldiers go through those drills, tough drills, to be ready for anything, right?
Right.
So when we reflect on our suffering, not judging, but curious, it prepares us for challenges later.
So it's about building resilience, like
Yeah.
mental and emotional muscles.
Exactly. Not seeking out suffering. But when it happens, facing it head on can be better than avoiding it.
Ripping off the Band-Aid, it's going to hurt, but then you can heal.
Yes. And, he points out, a lot of our suffering comes from our own thoughts and reactions.
Okay, so how do we change those? Especially when things are tough.
He's big on inner contentment and
Yeah.
practicing compassion for ourselves and others.
So the more grounded we are, the less likely we are to spiral when things go wrong.
Exactly. Doesn't mean we pretend we're not feeling those difficult emotions, sadness, anger, whatever.
But it's about how we respond to them.
Yes. Choosing our response.
Yeah.
You decide if those emotions control you or if you ride them like waves.
Now that is a good analogy. We have that power to choose our response, even when things are hard. So we've talked about those external challenges, those ways, but what about the ones inside us? That inner critic that just doesn't quit.
Oh, that inner voice can be brutal. The
Mm.
Dalai Lama talks about this, about building real self-confidence.
But there's a balance, right? Because you don't want to tip over into
He's very
arrogance.
clear about that distinction. Real confidence, he says, it comes from knowing your abilities, honestly, while arrogance,
Arrogance is more about needing others to tell you you're great.
spot on. And he connects this to motivation. When you're acting from compassion, wanting to help others, that self-doubt tends to fade.
Makes sense, because then even if you stumble, your heart was in the right place.
Exactly. And this leads into his thoughts on spirituality and happiness. He's drawing from Buddhist beliefs here.
Do you have to be Buddhist, though, to connect with that?
That's what's so cool. He says no. Different religions, even secular philosophies, they offer ways to find purpose.
It's that universal need to be part of something bigger.
Right. And while he acknowledges faith can be helpful, especially with suffering, he's wary of blind faith.
Or using it to justify bad things.
Yet, true spirituality, for him, should always lead to more compassion, kindness.
Lifting each other up, not pushing down.
He even tells this story about a chant master imprisoned for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And this master said the hardest part wasn't the torture, it was almost losing compassion for his captors.
To hold on to that in that situation, that's incredible.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
And the Dalai Lama, he reminds us this compassion, it's not just for others.
We need to give it to ourselves, too.
Exactly, which is so hard sometimes.
So how do we actually quiet that inner critic?
Yeah,
Be kinder to ourselves.
he talks about focusing on our potential while also accepting that we have inherent worth as people.
Like, we're already enough, but we can also grow.
That's the idea. He uses this term Buddha nature, this capacity for enlightenment that everyone has.
So no matter what, we're all capable of becoming better. I like that.
And part of that is self-compassion, being kind to ourselves even when we mess up.
Instead of beating ourselves up, which I'm guilty of that.
It's something he talks about with anger, too, actually.
Yeah.
He suggests there's a positive kind of anger.
Wait, really? Anger can be a good thing.
It can be rooted in compassion. Like a parent seeing their child bullied, their anger makes them protect.
So it's about what you do with the anger.
Yes, even when it's destructive anger, he says, face it head on, figure out the triggers, and cultivate the opposites.
Patience, tolerance, all that.
He's big on patience. Not being passive, but that inner strength to stay composed when things are tough.
Riding the waves, we're back to that.
Right. And when we talk about those emotional waves, fear is a big one. He separates rational fear, like real danger.
From the kind that's all in your head.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
being careful around a wild animal, that makes sense. Being terrified to speak in
But
public.
nobody's actually going to hurt you.
Right. He has this really practical approach to worry. Can you solve the problem? Do it. If not, accept it and move on.
Don't waste energy on what you can't control. Sounds simple.
Easier said than done, for sure. But what I find comforting, he talks about how he experiences anxiety too,
No way, the Dalai Lama gets anxious.
especially before speaking to big crowds.
Okay, that actually makes me feel better.
And he deals with it by remembering his purpose
Yeah.
to help others,
Mm-hmm.
not about being perfect or impressing anyone.
Shifting that focus outward. So taking a step back from everything we've talked about.
It's a lot.
It really seems like for the Dalai Lama, happiness isn't about this perfect, blissful state.
Definitely not about never feeling anything negative.
He's honest about his own struggles. It's more about, we're going to have all these emotions,
The whole spectrum.
but we have a choice in how we react to them. We have more power than we think.
Now that is a powerful message.
It really is. And for me, the big takeaway is, what can we each do, even in small ways, to show compassion today?
To ourselves and others.
Yes. And when we face those inevitable challenges, how can we find the meaning, the opportunity for growth?
Those are the questions to keep asking ourselves.
Absolutely. And on that note, thank you all so much for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, take care.